In life, terrible things can happen. Our health, our relationships, our careers can be strong and buoyant in one moment, and the next they can come crashing down when we find that we are living an illusion of safety. But what happens next when everything that we take for granted collapses beneath us and our world goes topsy-turvy? We have two choices. The first is to let the world win, to blame our circumstances for our problems and regret everything that we've lost, and to dream of escape, whilst actually staying contained and restricted within the walls that we refuse to accept. Or the other option is to accept our situation with grace, to find gratitude in whatever we still have, and to fight with the strength of a lion to improve anything that we have the power to improve. It is ironic that only by accepting the situation can we learn to transcend it. And on that, welcome to the Growth Mindset Podcast. I am delighted to introduce the topic of the episode today and a truly stunning guest, Dr. Niall McCann. If you haven't heard of him, Niall is an intrepid explorer who has rowed the Atlantic, skied across Greenland, cycled the Himalayas. He also runs the charity National Park Rescue, which is preserving the rare natural habitats of the world and preventing poaching and the wiping out of endangered species. And if you weren't already impressed, well, Niall broke his back a few years ago in a flying accident and faced the prospect of nearly dying and then the prospect of never walking again. His abilities were radically changed forever, and yet he's in training to ski across a very big ice cap in Iceland that I can't pronounce, but he'll pronounce it perfectly later. Go on. You can do this, Sam. Vatnajökull. Whatever. He's going to be skiing across the Vatnajökull ice cap in Iceland, which is the largest ice cap in Europe, and he's going to be doing it with two other paraplegics who've also broken their backs and are very into adventure. He just doesn't let the world defeat him. And so I invited Niall on the show because he has a really brilliant set of mental models for dealing with the world, and I was fascinated to ask him about his accident and how we can all learn to be more resilient and positive in the face of adversity. I will just warn you that the following conversation does have a few gory moments. If that's not your thing, you may want to skip the episode, but otherwise, this is an absolute banger of an episode, and you definitely want to listen to the whole thing. And if you have any friends that have got some problems in their life, health or otherwise, I think this is an epic listen. And on that, enjoy the show with Dr. Niall McCann. Hello and welcome to the Growth Mindset Podcast. Today we have Dr. Niall McCann, who was here a few years ago and was one of my favorite guests. Niall grew up in Shrewsbury, which is actually just around the corner from me, and has done some pretty incredible things with his life. When he was 18, he cycled through the Himalayas. He's also rowed across the Atlantic and skied across Greenland, and has since broken his spine, yet is still doing adventurous things. He's in the mountain rescue for the Brecon Beacons. He's planning adventures. And then you run National Park Rescue, which is protecting national parks and preventing poaching and loss of diversity and habitat, which is a pretty big thing to be doing. So welcome back.
Thanks, Sam. Nice to see you. Thank you for having me back.
My absolute pleasure. So there's quite a lot of things I'd like to discuss. I thought we could start with a bit of a quickfire round and maybe go into some more of your adventurous history and near-death experiences, because there's quite a few of them. And I'd love to know how they keep happening and where your mindsets come from around that, because something I've dealt with a bit. So firstly, on the quick questions, would you prefer extreme hot or extreme cold?
Extreme cold.
If you could have like a one-sentence elaboration, maybe two.
With extreme cold, you can almost always warm yourself up. Whereas with extreme hot, it's very difficult to cool yourself down. That being said, you're more likely to die in extreme cold than extreme hot. But as a northerly latitude person, I feel much more comfortable in extreme cold than I do in extreme hot.
Take your chances. Yeah, I think I'm slightly the other way around, but I haven't spent enough time in the extremes. Extreme rowing or extreme running?
These days, extreme rowing. Previously, I would have said extreme running. But since breaking my back, running is really, really difficult for me. I manage it, but it's very difficult. And rowing is much simpler for me. So not that I want to take the easy way out, but extreme rowing.
Blue planet or life on Earth?
Good question. Life on Earth. But why? Just a gut feeling. And as a scientist, I shouldn't think with my gut. I should think with my head. I've always had more of an interest in terrestrial biology than I have in marine biology. And that's just maybe my bias. My dad was a marine biologist, but he studied seals, so they spend a lot of their time on land. And I've always personally had more of an interest in planet Earth rather than the oceans beneath us.
Reading or writing?
Both. Can I have a Winnie the Pooh answer? I want both condensed milk and honey. Yeah, I love writing. I really enjoy it. So if I could only choose one, I would choose to read rather than write. But I do love doing both.
This might be similarly difficult. Pizza or pasta?
Both. Yeah. But again, if I could only have one for the rest of my life, it would be pasta just because of the versatility.
Thank you for enlightening me on your preferences there. That already kicks us off on some of the near-death experiences. So how did you break your back and then survive?
I was into a sport called speed flying, which is a derivative of paragliding. But instead of floating around and enjoying the view, you run or you ski off a mountain and you plummet down it. Buzz Lightyear style, you're falling with style. And it's a fabulous sport.
So I see loads of stuff on Instagram lately of those kind of reels. It seems to know my preferences of like people doing extreme stuff, and it looks super scary.
It can be super scary if you're doing it at a really high level. And my mistake was to try and do it at a level higher than I was capable of doing it at. Speed flying, like most sports, there's an inherent danger, but that danger is managed by how you perform in the field, the risks you choose to take. And my mistake with speed flying was to be trying to fly above my skill level from the start. And that's partially just inherent nature, wanting to do harder things, seeing people on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram doing astonishing things with these tiny little parachutes, crazy fast speeds, super close to the ground, tricks, all this type of stuff. And thinking, oh, I could do that. And then partially it was also because my brother took up speed flying at the same time. It was his idea. And he was just automatically so much better than I was and was flying at such a higher level. I was just trying to keep up with him. I just should have accepted the fact that I'm not very good at this. And to do speed flying safely, just try and stay away from the ground. You're still traveling fast. You're traveling at somewhere between 40 and 50 miles an hour in a straight line, and then faster when you turn. But if you're doing that with a cushion of air around you, that's fine. It's when you're doing that right next to the ground that the cushioning factor of the ground is far less than air. And so we did a couple of trips to the Alps and to Greenland where we were incorporating speed flying into our trip. And you can do that safely, just flying from the top of the mountain to the bottom of the mountain, steering clear of the cliff edges. And you just have to come to a sprinting stop or a skiing stop at the bottom. And that's basically fine. It's safe. It's immensely enjoyable, unbelievable views, wonderful thing to do. But inevitably, because of my character and because of trying to keep up with my brother and because of seeing what was happening in that sport online, I was trying to also buzz the ground, get used to flying closer to the ground.
Yeah, you see loads of that. It looks amazing.
You know, that urge.
Definitely. Something I tend to have. I get bored pretty quickly doing something that I know I can do. I generally always just jump right in the deep end and do the more difficult stuff, but it's probably an area or like a skill you definitely shouldn't be doing that with.
Possibly. But again, I've always had a similar mentality to things. Just throw yourself in at the deep end. So when I rowed across the Atlantic, I'd never rowed a boat before rowing across the Atlantic. Never used a rowing machine until the day we started training for that trip. When I skied across Greenland, I'd never done any cross-country skiing before skiing across Greenland. So I kind of often feel that with characters like yours and mine, jumping in at the deep end and just trusting that you'll swim has been an interesting way of doing it.
Yeah, my ultramarathon, I hadn't run a marathon before, but it was like, well, I'll be able to do one of those probably because people seem to do them quite well. Let's do the ultra version. And yeah, did end up fracturing my leg.
Yeah, how are your shin splints?
I managed to get to Glastonbury okay. Like I literally just got off crutches the week before. So that was fine. Still can't run or hop yet, but it's coming back, which is nice.
Give it time.
It's definitely a good lesson to work out the danger level of the thing that you're jumping into.
Totally. But sometimes you just have to commit. And speed flying is ultimately committing because you leg it until you take off. And if the mountain you're running off is steep enough, then you need to take off because the consequences are pretty dire. And it's a very committing sport. I loved it. My entry into it was straight in at the deep end. So ordered the thing on eBay. I had 6 flights to practice up in Shropshire, just on the eastern side of the Long Mynd. Crashed on my first flight, but that was okay. And then made the next 5 flights successfully, top to bottom, landing in a cow field at the bottom. Then flew to Greenland with my brother, flying off mountains in the middle of nowhere, still kind of learning my way around the wing and getting to know which way around you need to hold it, that type of stuff. It was an amazing trip to incorporate this wonderful new sport with mountaineering in an astonishing landscape with my brother. It was the most amazing trip, and I was just gripped by speed flying. And over the next couple of years, I flew a bit more and a bit more, but was starting to try and fly closer and closer to the ground. Whereas really what I should have done was just consolidate those skills and just do top to the bottom flying over and over again, get 200 or 300 flights under my belt and just get to know everything about the wing and how it moves and how I move under it. But I was thinking that really what I need to be doing is fly faster, fly closer to the ground, pull bigger turns.
Was there like an app that you could do to practice as well? Because certainly for getting better at drones and things, there's quite a lot of apps that you can do sort of fake flying with before you take on the extreme ones.
Good question. There might be, but I never found anything like that. The best way to practice is just to get out in the wind and just stand there with your speed wing above you. It's a parachute that sits above you and it's quite responsive to wind. And if you just get used to ground handling, so just standing on the ground, but keeping the wing under control and being able to move it, that's a good way to practice.
Similar for like kite surfing and things, I guess, which is where my near-death experience came from.
Yeah, that was pretty unpleasant. I still have that photograph of your shattered femur on my phone. And whenever I do a medical course and femur breaks come up, I always show that as an example of this is what you shouldn't do to your femur. This is what a femur shouldn't look like. Always gets winces.
That's good to hear. So what actually happened? And then did you know that you'd broken your back? And what do you do at that point?
My brother and I decided we wanted to fly the big steep north face of Pen y Fan, which is the highest mountain in South Wales. So we hiked up on the morning of the 6th of May, 2016, left the car park at about 9:30 in the morning. And I remember that because, I popped the loo. And that was the last time I was able to go to the loo for 21 days and 12 hours.
I think I had 6 days of not being able to go to the loo, which was nowhere near as bad.
So we hiked up to the top, checked out the winds. We couldn't fly from exactly where we wanted to, but we found a good exit points where the winds were pretty solid. And I flew off. My brother was about to take off and his parachute to collapse. He lost the pressure of the wind in his parachute. So he was just going to wait for it to pick up again. Whereas I'd taken off a couple of seconds before, so I'd got away. And I set off and you're straight over. So it was a cliff launch. It was fully committing. Turned 90 degrees to the left and then 180 degrees to the right again to try and stay close to the face. Then went to turn 180 degrees to the left again, but instead of turning 180 degrees, I turned about 200 degrees without meaning to. There was nothing I could do. I started coming out of it, but I was losing so much height because of the speed of the wing and still plummeting towards this gully. So there's a series of gullies and I imagine your fingers are the ridges. And that's what that north face of Pen y Fan is like. I realized I was going to hit one of those fingers, one of the ridges, and then I was going to bounce into the gully. And I remember at the point I was about to hit it, I'd already accepted the fact that there was nothing I could do. I couldn't stop myself. I remember just thinking, well, this is how I die. That's a shame. There's an acceptance to it at that stage. There's nothing you can do. I can't get myself out of this situation. This is the situation I'm in. So I smashed into this ridge.
How many seconds was that? Just like half a second before you're going to smash it? Or was it like a few sort of 5 seconds of like, oh God, just impending?
I probably had somewhere in the region of 4 or 5 seconds of knowing that I was going to hit this. And then at that last moment, I've tried to pull out of this and I can't. So I'm going to hit it. And then last second, tiny choice. Do I hit feet first or do I pull my feet up? Pulled my feet up. And I don't know whether that was the right decision because if I'd hit feet first, I would have smashed my legs, obviously. So maybe I'd have broken everything. Whereas just pulling my feet up and impacting with my bum first broke my back, but saved my legs. I don't know whether that was the right decision. Impossible to say without running through that scenario again, which I'm not willing to do.
Can't help you there. That's definitely something that you're like, if you'd done it just about correctly, it might have been better.
My guess is I'd have just broken more than I did break. It was weird. So I remember hitting and I bounced off this ridge. And I remember just seeing my arms and legs all straightening out like this. Like when you see someone getting knocked out and their arm just goes straight like that, but both arms and both legs completely straight. And I somersaulted over and then landed. Turned out I fell about 9 meters into the gully that I fell into. So hit this ridge, fell 9 meters into the gully, and then started to tumble. And knowing the profile of that mountain and how steep it is, I knew that was going to kill me. If the impact hadn't, then I knew that the tumble out was going to kill me. So it came as quite a pleasant surprise when I came to a stop. Just the friction of me and my parachute going through that gully got snagged up or something. I came to a stop, and I remember there was a very specific moment. It was a fight to stay alive, and then got through that moment of immediate peril and relaxed again. And it was like, right, I am alive. That's a bonus. I wasn't expecting that. Need to see where the stuff moves. I wiggled my feet and they moved. So I was like, well, that's great. I kind of just started sorting myself out, got myself out of my parachute, tried to get my harness off, but I couldn't get it below my waist because my legs weren't working very well. Subsequently looking at the footage, because I was wearing a camera on my head and I took my helmet off and put it down, and the camera then recorded a lot of what happened for the next hour or so. Looking at that footage, it turned out I got myself onto my knees and then collapsed over again. I don't have any memory of this, but I got up onto my knees to try and stand up and try and get my harness off my waist, and just collapsed over, and then was lying there in a fetal position when my brother got to me. And as he arrived, I remember saying to him, "Don't call mountain rescue yet, Finn. I might be able to walk out of here." It became clear that that wasn't going to happen pretty quickly. And yeah, pretty grim.
Wow, that's insane. Definitely sort of a bit surreal when you first do things, because the pain, I think, doesn't necessarily hit you. When I broke my femur, I was there, like, my leg was flapping around, so I knew it was completely broken. I kind of lost my strength to do anything. And I thought I was going to die, but then 5 minutes later, my instructor turned out to pull me out. And I was like, no, it's fine. I guess I'll swim or something, even though I'd basically given up on swimming because my body wouldn't do anything. Yeah, what goes through your head is a bit odd.
The pain thing's interesting. I've got a good working definition of it, having gone through quite a lot of pain. And I've always felt that I've got quite a high pain tolerance. About, what would it have been, 7 months, 8 months before my big accident, I had a much smaller accident on my speed wing. Flew into the ground again, but not on a cliff, just on the side. I should have given up. Should have quit while I was ahead. So I flew into the ground on a slope rather than a cliff, and mountain rescue attended, did their treatment based on what I was telling them, because that's generally how someone treats you. A medical practitioner can only treat what they see or what is communicated to them. So they could see that I had a hole in my leg and it was bleeding quite a lot, and I was communicating that I wasn't in that much discomfort. And when they asked me what pain level was, 1 to 10, I said, well, it's probably a 4. Because in my head, 10 out of 10 was terrible. And I felt that what I had at the moment was a 4. What we subsequently discovered when I went into hospital, surgeons debrided the hole in my leg and cleaned it out and stitched me up. They discovered that the rock that I'd hit had actually scratched my femur. So I had a rock rip my ITB through my quad, and actually the scratch marks from this rock on my femur. And so when I explained to Mountain Rescue, oh, it turned out I scratched my femur, they said, well, why the hell did you say it was only a 4 out of 10? Because they would have treated me differently. They would have given me more analgesia. They might have called things in a bit quicker, but they would have affected the way that they were treating me. But because I gave it a 4 out of 10, that they treated me in a certain way. And again, I argued with them and I said, well, 10 out of 10 is when the only thing in your world at that time is your pain and the desire for it to end. If you can see, if you can hear, if you can engage with anyone around you, you're not at a 10.
That was exactly my thinking. Yeah, I got asked with my femur where I was, and I said 6. So my femur was like completely snapped in two, as you know. And they didn't think I'd broken anything because of that. And they were kind of like, yeah, you're right. They put me in 3 different ambulances, and like it took a long time to get to the bloody hospital. The doctor, after finally scanning my leg, which was ridiculously broken, like runs in us, going like, dude, your femur's completely fucked. I'm like, yeah, I think I know this. And they're like, we need to do something quickly. Like, yes, you do. Then,
please do.
Yeah, why didn't you say it was a 10? I'm like, I heard what you were saying. I could think about it logically. I was like, 10 is, I can't even think. It's just pure pain. Surely 10 is the maximum. And I feel they should change the way they explain this question to people.
Yeah, so if breaking a femur's 6, scratching a femur's definitely a 4. Breaking your back is 10 out of 10. So lying there on the mountainside was like an 8 or a 9. It's horrendously uncomfortable, but I could still speak. I could look at my watch and tell them what GPS coordinates I was at so we could send the helicopter exactly to where I was. I could engage with people, but every time they moved me, So when they rolled me over to get me onto the stretcher and to put on the pelvic binder, that was a 10. World just goes black. You lose the ability to see or hear. Just pain.
When you got to hospital, so you said you had like 21 days that you couldn't use the toilet. So did you have
21 days and 12 hours? Those 12 hours matter.
Yeah, I remember like my 6 days or maybe 7, like every moment I was in a very dark place of like, okay, I'm not really sure how long my life is going to carry on or if I just sort of want to leave. It was very hard. Were you like every hour did you feel was like a fight? Because I definitely felt that way a bit for myself until like I had my surgery.
I had 2 surgeries. So as soon as I came in, I had surgery that day because they discovered that I'd burst my L1, badly fractured L2, and then I'd also fractured T4, 5, and 6 that are up at chest height, and T5 was unstable, which just meant that I had to be in a Miami JTO collar. It's a horrible collar for 3 months, pretty unpleasant. But the big thing they needed to do straight away was to fuse my back. So I snapped in half and I twisted. So they had to untwist me, unfold me, and then fuse that. At least I was stable there. And then cut out the dead muscle from my fillets either side of my spine. So in the process of snapping, I'd obviously cut the circulation to my muscles. And 8 hours after the accident, I was on the operating theatre and they said the muscles were already starting to die. They had quite strong biochemical readings suggesting that this was happening, but then also the muscle was beginning to look black because it had lost all of its circulation. So they had to cut that out so I didn't get gangrenous or whatever it is that happens to dead muscle. So they cut out a load of fillet muscle either side of my back. And that was the first operation. And the second operation was to replace that first vertebra with a titanium cage. And then that now forms my L1. It's a titanium cage that's then packed with ground up bone that slowly ossifies over time. I was in good spirits for a lot of it. Night times are a nightmare. Your body rhythms, the noises of the hospital, people that sleep talk, people that cry at night, all this type of stuff. It's just nighttime, you're really, really conscious of your pain and your discomfort and your newfound disability.
I found like, especially as the time went on, being stuck in the same position where you can't move started to get worse and worse. And the back of your lungs started to kind of get raspy and everything just started to hurt more and more because I couldn't move anything really, even though it was technically just my leg because it was the femur. If I moved my hips in the slightest bit, it would move the whole area of muscle and things. And what would happen is, because I had quite a lot of drugs and things trying to make me go to sleep, but as I'd be falling asleep, because I was stuck on my back and my legs were raised, I'd have the feeling that I was falling backwards. So if you have those dreams where you feel like you're falling and you suddenly wake up, I'd have those, but I'd wake up by kicking, which obviously I couldn't do. So I'd wake up every hour, like having just basically stabbed my leg with like the half a bone that was there. And I'd be like, fuck it. And it would be quite annoying.
My nemesis was sneezing. Sneeze is all body.
I could sneeze without moving my bottom so much. It was always scary.
So sneezing was terrible, like a cattle prod going through your body when that happened. So the second operation was complicated. First one, they just lie you on your front, zip you open basically by your back and do all that. That's relatively easy because your spine's just there. Second operation was way more complex. They open you up down the side, so cut open around your rib cage, chop out your 11th rib, hoik your guts out the way so that they're not in the way. Again, the radiologist came and told me afterwards, yeah, the surgeon brought me over and we could see your heart beating in your chest, like through the hole. She was obviously quite excited by it, pretty mad. But yeah, so they hoik your guts out the way. So that then enables them to get at your spine from the front as opposed to from the back. And then they're having to take out all the fragments of my smashed up vertebra that were in there and put in the new cage that way and then pack it all again. But as part of all that process, I got a little pneumothorax cut through the lining pleural cavity, which just means that air gets into your lungs and can't get out. That needs to be fixed, otherwise you get a collapsed lung. And that was fixed, but it just meant that I had quite a few issues for a few days. My heart rate was running at like 120 per minute for 3 days, and breathing was very difficult. I only could take really, really shallow breaths. And obviously some irritation to my lung as a result of that. I developed a bit of a spontaneous cough for a couple of days. And again, coughing makes your body do that and tense up. And that's not what you want to do when you've just got a newly broken rib that they've just sawn off and obviously a broken spine and everything else. So coughing was bloody awful as well. I was largely quite positive, but the bowel thing, the fact that I couldn't go to the loo, like, you imagine this dark cloud on the horizon. And just over the course of the days, that dark cloud got closer and closer. And then eventually it was right on top of me. And after 21 days, I was starting to get slightly despondent, and I'm pretty upbeat. So it's quite rare for me to feel despondent, but I wasn't feeling great at this stage. I was getting to the point where even sipping water would make me gag because I was so full. That's not great. Human beings can fecal vomit, which is a fucking awful thought. I never got to that stage.
That's nuts. Yeah, I definitely had like that looming worry the whole time because I couldn't move my hips in the slightest to get them off the bed. And it was like, I really don't want to have to go for a poo. Like, I couldn't imagine.
Your bowel every day is removing about a liter of water from the food that's moving its way through your body. So it's always sucking fluid. So if you've been there for 21 days without taking a poo, it's taken all the fluid out. There's no lubrication now. You're just full of concrete. And what they eventually managed to do was to try and soften that concrete in my bowel. So they tried loads of different enemas and laxatives and all this type of stuff, and nothing was working. And then eventually they threw one final thing at it, which is called gastrographin, which is really high in iodine, which means it's got a very high osmotic potential. So it increases the ions in your gut, which sucks fluid from the rest of your body into your gut. So you've got to be quite careful that you don't prune up too badly, suck all of the fluid from everywhere into your gut. And that softens the concrete that's in there and eventually lets it out. So yeah, after 21 days and 12 hours, I had my first astonishing poo after all that time.
Were you by yourself for this poo? Were you able to go to the toilet? 'Cause I remember my first poo quite vividly.
I couldn't walk. I stood up for the first time, but with 3 people helping me 2 days before that. Like the whole gravity aspect and just having moved for the first time in 19 days, 2 days before I had my poo, that probably helps get the gut moving, but gastrographin was the thing that really got it going. So I've been on my back 21 days. And that was the first day that I'd been able to move onto my side. And I was lying on my back. I'm feeling really, really bad. It was that day my brothers had visited me in hospital and I haven't been very engaging, whereas normally I'm quite conversational, but I'd basically been kind of drifting in and out of consciousness. I wasn't in a great way because of the discomfort around my guts, really. And I was lying there on my back and I rolled over to the side, heard this horrendous sound, like grumbling, awful sounds. And I just lay there, not really knowing what was happening. I couldn't look, I couldn't twist to see. Thankfully, I was in a private room. It was NHS hospital because of MRSA or something. And 5 minutes later, the nurse, Cindy, opened the door and stood in the doorway and just went, "Oh, Niall, it's begun." And then she came up to me and said, "Niall, do you want me to take a photograph?" And I was like, "Yes." So I handed her my phone and she arranged the lighting in the room to light my backside perfectly and took a photograph on my phone. Then she went off to get buckets and bleach and mops and a team of cleaners to come and clean the mess. And I uploaded the photograph to my family WhatsApp with the caption, "Fuck yeah." That's how it began. So yeah, things started to move a little bit after that. Goodness, quite something.
How long did it take in terms of getting rid of 21 days worth of food? Is that like a few day process or?
Yeah, it took a few days and it was totally involuntary. If I'd move, you'd hear another squelch or whatever would happen. I had one incident, it was the first days they tried to get me walking by myself, along on the crutches, and suddenly I felt I'm about to faint. So obviously just having been stood up for a while, all the blood had pulled to my feet and I realized I was about to collapse over. And at the point when I was about to faint, I also dumped at least a liter's worth of crap out at the same time. So it was one of those, the entire body just collapsing. So about to pass out with a faint, crap myself everywhere, and get scooped up and spooned back into my bed and all that. So you just have to kind of live with that. And you have to put aside prudishness when you're in that kind of circumstance. Otherwise, it's just such a degrading situation if you're worried about it. So just try and see it as funny. And a lot of it was pretty funny.
Yeah, I made a lot of jokes also during the ambulance part as well, which I don't think helped me in any way in hindsight around how seriously they took me. They're like, this guy's definitely fine.
That's just a coping mechanism, I guess. Just being cheerful, trying to be the one that brings the room up.
Yeah, because when people just come out, "Oh, I'm so sorry for you, everything's just bad." You're like, well, it's like, well, if I'm stuck in a wheelchair the rest of my life, I can write lots of books. I'll be like Stephen Hawking or something.
One of the first things they said to me was that I might never walk again. And I remember instantly responding when they said that. I said, "That's all right. I've had an awesome life." I was thinking 2 things. Like you, I was thinking that if I was going to spend the rest of my life in a wheelchair, just do great stuff in a wheelchair. And I'm going to rock that chair. I'm going to have great expeditions. I'm going to write books, read books. I can still engage with people. That's fine. If I end up being in a wheelchair, okay, I don't want this. But I was reconciled to it. And yeah, every stage when you're told different things, Yeah, one of the interesting parts about the mental health aspect of this and your approach to recovery, I wanted to see people that were fit and be like, right, I want to be like that guy. Whereas some people, they want to be around people that are really, really unwell and be like, well, at least I'm not as bad as that guy. And so the hospital I first went into is the big hospital in Cardiff, the Heath Hospital. And it's the spinal resuscitation unit. So everyone that's just had some terrible spinal accident ends up in that ward, Ward A6. And it's an awful place to be because everyone's really, really unwell. They've just had something catastrophic happen to them, or they've been long-term unwell with a spinal injury. It's quite a depressive place because lots of people crying, lots of people having very bad instances. So I was better off than a lot of these people, even though I wasn't in a great way myself. And my surgeon forced me that I leave that ward and go to just a normal orthopedic ward where most people are there for a shoulder operation or they've just broken an arm, or where everyone would be better off than me, because he felt that, given my personality type, that's what I needed to see. That was, an interesting intervention on his behalf. He performed the surgery, which is a vital intervention, but also that palliative intervention I felt was really important as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I didn't think about it quite like that, but I guess I didn't have so long there. They were kind of like, okay, as soon as you're able to manage yourself on crutches, you're kind of out of here. And I was also in Spain, so they were trying to get me home. But yeah, I was just in a room with a guy that had like a dodgy heart. So it was really nice because sort of in Spain, there's a bit less focus on the nursing and more on family coming to help you. So his family were constantly around, so I got to see them a lot. But yeah, he was in quite a different situation to me. I literally didn't see anybody else at all.
Yeah, that would have been hard. I was lucky that my family were able to come visit. The reason why I objected to moving hospitals first was because my wife works in the teaching hospital in Cardiff. And so I could see her 3 times a day because she would come in at breakfast, come in at lunch break, and come in the evening. And when I moved hospitals, I could only see her once a day. Once her working day was over, she would come and see me. And I quite liked to see my wife 3 times a day. But actually, the surgeon was right that what was more important was having those fitness targets to get myself out of bed and get moving. And that really made a difference.
See things are a bit closer, especially when you have people that are come in and completely bedbound, and like a few days time, you see them hobbling around a bit more, and you see other people having progression. And then when you have like a day where you've tried to walk and end up sort of shitting yourself and collapsing, and motivation to get back up the next day is probably a thing. Oh, that's insane. And now look at you, you started running after quite a long time. So how much feeling do you have? Is everything basically working? Like your toes move and all this sort of stuff?
Toes move badly. So I can't really splay my toes, especially my right foot. My left foot is fractionally more agile. My right foot, I can crunch my toes, but I can't splay them. My sensation is all right on my legs, but not 100%. Top parts of my thighs and down my shins, almost 100% sensation, just not quite. Left foot, I can feel almost everything. Right foot, less. And then kind of going up the backs of my thighs, sensation starts to get worse and worse until you reach the very top of my thigh. I could only feel if you press. And that's the same for my saddle. My backside, I can't really feel at all. Although, like leprosy, it seems great when you can't feel stuff until you end up really hurting yourself without noticing. So yeah, I could get a sore on my bum without noticing. And of course, that can be quite problematic.
My immediate thought was, well, I got into mountain climbing after my legs. I ended up doing the Matterhorn, which is like a goal for me, which was a really handy thing to have. As like, it just really motivated me to do all my physio as much as possible and as much exercise. But whilst doing it, you realize how much sensation you need to be able to know in your feet, because there's so much time that you're not tied to anything, that you need to have really accurate footwork capabilities, which I'm guessing you don't have anymore. So can you do dangerous things like that? Or do you have to be really visually sure of where your feet are going? And don't know how you can do that without sensation.
So I'm still quite comfortable or quite confident on steep ground. I'd say certainly much more than the average person. I remember with one of the mountain rescue guys, we were on steep ground not too long after my accident, and he just looked at me and went, "I see you're still bold as fuck." And that was quite an interesting way of putting it. I'm just getting back into slacklining again. Slacklining was something I used to do quite a lot of, used to really enjoy it. Slacklining's freaking hard for someone that can't feel their feet 100% and doesn't have any proprioceptive control, really. So the stabilizing muscles in my feet and my ankles just don't really work. Slacklining's now super hard, but I'm slowly getting back into it. And just with all of this, just getting that balance back slowly, like standing on one foot, not great at. Standing anywhere, looking up, even on 2 feet, I'm likely to tip backwards a bit. So I just have to be a little bit more careful about my balance. But then, yeah, I'm in the mountain rescue team. So I'm in the mountains all the time and rock climbing again and that type of stuff, especially indoors. So when I first tried it, I was really wondering how it was going to be. The only issue is if you need to be really putting pressure on your toes. If you don't need to do masses of pressure, then I can get away with it, really. I'm looking forward to doing some proper multi-pitch outdoor rock climbing over the next little while and just seeing how it goes. And I guess I'll ease myself in to start with some easy routes and just learn what I'm capable of. But then my friend Ed Jackson, he was a professional rugby player. He broke his neck diving into a swimming pool, was unable to move anything from his neck down for the first 7 days, and now is able to do quite a lot, but still has significant quadriplegic issues. Ed has just climbed Mount Toubkal, which is the highest mountain in the Atlas. And he's been out to the Alps climbing with Leo Holding, one of Britain's top climbers. Ed's doing astonishing things. He's been up a 6,000 meter mountain in Nepal. He's almost summited a 7,000 meter mountain. And Ed's got quite significant motor issues and sensation issues and is still doing this stuff. So when you've got the determination, the perseverance, some of the physical capacity as well, it's really quite remarkable what you're able to achieve, even with quite a high level of disability.
That's insane. Very inspiring for someone who doesn't have these issues, that they can probably definitely go and do these things.
Definitely. So much of it's in the head. We always talk about top 2 inches. And that's the same for so many things. When it comes to adventure sport, the most important part is the top 2 inches. If your head's in the right place, if you're calm enough, you're confident enough, you're likely to be able to succeed. My issue really is not about whether or not I can do something. It's just coming to terms with the fact that to do these things, I have to do them more slowly than before. So I used to be very quick in the mountains and loved being quick. I now am slower just because my calves don't really work. I can't stand on one toe at a time. So I don't have propulsion. So I just have to accept the fact that I'm slower and my balance isn't as good. I can still do all these things, just at a slightly lower level than I used to. And that's just for me to deal with. And it's quite interesting. After the time when I scratched my femur, I went up Snowdon that week on crutches. And I got so many props. Here you are, you're hobbling up Snowdon with an obviously fucked leg, and got to the summit. And basically everyone coming down was wanting to high five you, which is difficult when you're using 2 crutches. But everyone wanted to high five you and get so much props. Whereas now, getting up Snowdon, which I have done since my accident, is more complicated. When you're on crutches, you're conspicuously doing something really hard. Whereas now I'm not. People look at me and they're just like, I'm climbing a mountain with a spinal cord injury. And so it's funny, but that's all in your head. I should be getting kudos for climbing this with a spinal cord injury, and just suck it up and go for it.
Well, I had to went Glastonbury with crutches on, and definitely had a lot of people be like, wow, which is kind of nice. But that's something about like the visual side does make things a lot easier compared to just being internal, which, yeah, kind of related. I think when we talk about like sort of like mental health divergence and differences that people have on stuff, you don't necessarily notice how much more difficult some things are for some people compared to others. It's just kind of fascinating. I've really found speaking a difficult thing to get to terms with, for example, whereas most people seem to be quite good at it. So I kind of constantly like, oh my God, I'm actually having good conversations with people in public. It's very nice for me. Whereas most people just kind of do these things, but we all have our own battles.
I'm married to someone that's not naturally conversational. And it's interesting. I think she sometimes looks at me as like, how have you managed to have a conversation with someone for an hour about the same thing? Some things are natural to some and not to others. Speaking is one of those things that some people have the gift of the gab and others just don't.
Yeah, I definitely panic a lot sometimes. I'm just like, words, come on. That must be in there somewhere. It's really odd. But yeah, so how are you in terms of going for this next challenge around like the icecap one? Because you're doing that with 2 other people that also have spinal injuries. Are you guys not worried that there should be someone there that doesn't have a spinal injury, or is that kind of the point?
No, I'm pretty confident that we'll be fine. We're very likely to have a film crew in the vicinity. They'll drop in every now and then. They're likely to have a look at what we're up to. Ed Jackson is coming with me. Ed is an amazingly capable man, runs this charity called Millimeters to Mountains. And he's gone from, as I said, not being able to move at all to climbing up mountains himself. Ed has quite a few issues with temperature regulation, so that'll be interesting to monitor, especially somewhere so cold. He spent time at 6,500 meters in the ball, which is freaking cold. So he understands how to manage that. I'll be interested to see how Ed gets on, especially with temperature and some of the physical aspects. And then the third friend that we're doing this with is Darren Edwards. He's an amazing guy who was a climber, a mountaineer, and he was training to be in the Territorial Special Forces when he had a climbing accident and broke his spine in a very, very serious way, like way worse than mine. He's a complete paraplegic. He's got his top set of abs and then nothing beneath that. So he press his legs, he couldn't feel a thing. So Darren is in a wheelchair, but Darren is another astonishingly capable individual. Earlier this year, he went from Land's End to John O'Groats, and he's gone across the Channel in a rowboat. Later this year, he's doing 7 marathons, 7 continents, 7 days, which includes Antarctica. And he's very, very determined man.
The distance of that is insane before you even get into the health complications. Crikey.
Totally. And so the Antarctic aspect of that, he's going to have to do on some kind of device which enables him to travel across snow and ice. And that might end up being like a hand bike trike mechanism, or basically a ski polk that you use with poles. With Darren coming across the Vatnajökull icecap, the complications for him are bladder and bowel management, like me and Ed, temperature management as well, because of course he can't really regulate temperature in his lower body, but then also the fact that he's on a chair. We've got 3 guys, very physical, that all had that stripped away from them by an accident, who are now getting together to do a big exhibition again for themselves, but then also to raise money and awareness for spinal cord injuries. Because I don't want people that have a spinal cord injury to feel that that's the end of their life. There's so many great things you can do. There's a guy that's just gone up Kilimanjaro in a wheelchair. That's freaking insane. There's so many great things you can do, but most people don't necessarily realize that that means them too. When you're lying in bed and you're feeling despondent, that actually, no, these guys were there in the same position not that long ago, and here they are rocking across ice caps in Iceland. I really want that to have a motivational impact for people with spinal cord injuries or any other form of disability, but then also the mental health aspect as well, because all of us have had to deal with having a central part of our identity taken away and then rebuilding that piece by piece and coming to terms with that new identity and what that means for us as well. So I wanted to have these kind of multifaceted impacts on people, as well as just being a great thing for 3 mates to do together and something nice and adventurous.
Yeah, that's huge. I'm really looking forward to hearing how that goes, and hope the film crew get to make some cool things from that as well.
I'm sure they will. They're very good.
I think it's really fascinating, especially as you're saying, as in for people who have someone perhaps going through that situation or doing it themselves. It's very interesting because it was quite new to me when I ended up stuck in a hospital bed and had all these problems, and it's hard to really imagine until you actually hear about it.
I was really lucky. So one of my best mates, we met on a conservation project that we were both working on in Mauritius, the Mauritius Wildlife Foundation. Tom got thrown out the back of a 4-wheel drive that had a crash, and he landed on his bum and broke his back in a very, very similar way to me. That was in 2001 or 2002, so ages ago. I knew that Tom had then spent the next few years doing amazing things. Like his field work for his postdoc was off in Iceland in the Arctic, and he'd come out to Honduras with me during my PhD fieldwork, really remote area expedition where we 2.5 days cutting our own trail, 8 days then camped in a place that no one had ever been to before, hiking back out again. And Tom had done all of this, and I hadn't noticed any issues that he was having really. He mentioned that his balance wasn't so good, and I knew he didn't have 100% sensation on his legs. I didn't know that he was also having to manage his bladder and his bowel, and that he also had all of these other issues that I know. And so only when he came to visit me in hospital, and he said, everything you're going through now is what I went through 15 years ago, all the pieces came together, because I then subsequently found out that he had all of these issues. Because Tom's quite private, so he hadn't talked openly about those bladder and bowel issues until I then had them myself. He just talked about the loss of sensation and stuff. So for me, that was amazingly useful and helpful. Having that person I knew so well, having gone through something very similar and doing amazing things with his life, I was like, well, great. That's going to be me too.
Yeah, that's super useful. I didn't really have much info on that. I was just told that I would never be the same again. I might not really be walking. And that was all they gave me. And they're like, hopefully you'll be mostly okay. And I'm actually pretty much fine, apart from my legs just 1 inch shorter, which is just frustrating for repetitive things like very, very long distance running. Kind of messes up stuff.
Both your feet now point in the same direction as well?
Not quite. My right leg also points in a bit too much, which it's not so obvious when I start, but as my legs get more tired, it just looks like I've got a really weird loping thing, which is a bit frustrating. And it's sort of my right foot kind of pushes me to the left because it points in, and then my left foot just goes forwards like it should. And so I'm kind of slightly zigzagging the entire time, which is also a bit dumb.
But again, no one notices. When you're on crutches, everyone notices. No one knows that. It's like the way I walk. I don't just have this funny walk. That's because of my spinal injury, but it's internal, so no one can tell.
I was doing a hiking trip with a guy that was like leading who had like a slightly odd walk with his right foot, but like I picked him up straight away and was like asked him what was going on, and it was quite interesting. I have a chat with him where I was like, no one that normally ever asks me. I'm like, oh mate, I notice these things.
Physios and people that work in spinal injuries, they spot me straight away. They'll be like, spinal injury. Yeah.
A bit of a tangent. I was doing my Vipassana course, which is like the 10-day silent meditation retreat, and some guy had clearly spotted me, but because of my feet, which are quite short and really wide, and he was like, "Are you like a kickboxer or something? 'Cause you have like clubs for feet." And I'm like, "What? Thanks, mate. I tried it once, and it's not the best sport." Anyway, untangent back.
Have you spent time with indigenous people that just live in bare feet?
A little bit, and I feel like I should have done that a bit because I've got quite bad bunions from wearing shoes because my feet are wide and have been forced to be less wide than they should be.
After the Atlantic, my feet were like hands, basically. It was nuts. It was just spread out so much because that was 63 days without wearing shoes at all. And your feet just spread out. So you look at them by the end, I look like a hobbit. Just got these whopping great feet. It's hugely wide. Everything's
Might
spread
be
out.
useful for me. Who knows?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to do stuff to correct that. That's fascinating. Have you tried any of like the barefoot running and these things?
No, because I don't have any muscles left in my feet. I'm wondering whether it's a good thing to get some of these barefoot running shoes to try and help build them up a little bit.
Just walking around with them all day is also a good thing, even if you're not running. Can you do things like skipping and stuff?
Physios discharged me, so I'm free to do what I like these days, which is great. I can do all that. Skipping with a skipping rope is difficult because jumping is difficult, just because I don't have calves. It turns out your calves are really, really useful for all of this. So I can skip, but all of the propulsion comes from my quads because my calves and hamstrings and glutes don't really work. So it just means it's very inefficient. I can't do any bouncing on my toes. That just doesn't work. It's all quad related, so I'm very flat-footed in my skipping.
Yeah. So when you say that your calves don't work at all, so can you do like just standing on a step and doing like calf raises, or is it like just nothing happens?
I could do that with 2 feet, but if I were to take 1 foot away, I couldn't then do that. And it took me months to be able to get on 2 feet, to be able to stand on the tiptoes on 2. And that, I think it was like 7 months before I was able to do that at all. And then slowly that got better and better. But I'm still way off and probably never will be able to do it just on 1 foot, just do a single calf raise.
Man, can you do more the squats or like a single leg squat?
Pistol squats. I was so good at that type of stuff before. I can pistol squats still because my quads are very strong because they're doing everything. My issue with pistol squatting is balance. So I need to do it on wider shoes because my one-footed balance is quite poor. But yeah, being able to pistol squat again, that was one of those aims. A few things. So being able to do a muscle up again, that was a big aim of mine because that's a lot of back. What I haven't yet tried, I'm not sure whether I can do, is the old flag position. I used to be able to do that. I don't know whether I can do that still. I haven't tried. My back, obviously, where I had all that muscle cut out, that couldn't grow back because it was just taken out. And my core can't simply be as good as it used to be. So yeah, I'll be interested to see whether I can do that again. Like when I do sit-ups, they're much more challenging than I feel they should be.
That's kind of annoying, but also just really interesting and kind of cool. Anyway, any other stories of difficulty besides the femur scratch and then the back break you think like prepared you for this at all? Or do you think it was just generally your mentality around like doing difficult things and not wanting to be confined that's kept you in such good stead?
One of the things, just having a positive mentality helps, and that's just natural. We can all work on it. Our brain is a muscle and we can work on things. We can train ourselves to do certain things. And people with a naturally negative disposition can slowly train themselves towards more levels of positivity. But I'm quite lucky that I naturally have a positive disposition. So I was able to be quite pragmatic about all of this straight away. But then I guess having gone through trauma before, having had a couple of properly life-threatening situations before, having lost my dad, but then seen how he coped with his illness. So he got asbestos-related cancer and was given 11 months to live and survived 9.5 years, during which time he did an astonishing array of adventures, culminating 5 months before he died by climbing the nose of El Capitan, the most iconic climbing route on Earth. And he could barely walk at this stage. He struggled to walk to the base of the mountain, and then he spent 4 days living on the cliff face with my brother climbing the nose of El Capitan. So having seen Dad do that and having lived through all of that, I'd had quite a lot of exercise for dealing with trauma, be that psychological or physical. And my dad said when he got his diagnosis was bad and his prognosis was worse. His prognosis was 11 months. And he didn't want to let that stop him. He said his blood type was B positive, and he wanted to live his blood type. He wanted to be a positive guy. And my blood type is A positive. So I want to be a positive guy. So I very much took my dad's inspiration on that, and then took great heart from having the support of my family, my wife, my mum, my brothers, and family around me. And that certainly helped. But so much of it does come from within, and having those lived experiences of trauma and challenge and grief, I think prepared me for my recovery really well.
That's really funny. If someone is a negative blood type, it's not necessarily your destiny, just random arbitrary things, but it's nice to pick up on stuff like that. But yeah, that is definitely hugely inspiring to see something like that. I have found I haven't really had anything close like that, but I think just as you grow older, having people that do just die does make you very aware that there's no take two on your life or backup. You haven't really got much other chance to do interesting things, and your own responsibility to just take whatever situation you're in and try and make it as fun for yourself as possible.
Yeah, I'm always staggered by how few people, like, you're motivated by that. I'm motivated by that. I'm always staggered how few people are motivated by making the most of their one chance. Like, I'm always staggered, like, I get out there and do some great stuff, but most people just don't. They just stay in and do crap stuff.
Yeah, don't wait till next year because of whatever you could have done with this year with the past. You can't do that year again.
Remember a friend of mine, I expressed this kind of opinion to one of my best friends a few years ago, and how I wanted each year to build upon the last one, to use what I'd done in the previous year as a springboard for the next. And he felt that that was going to put a lot of pressure on me. But I want to live a relentless life. I want to be relentless in getting out there and having as many experiences as I can, but also in trying to have as positive impact on the planet as I possibly can. And I feel that having a relentless approach to life really helps me give the most and get the most out of life.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's just definitely energizing, and there's something really big about momentum as well. I think that just does keep you going and doing things, and that's certainly one of my things. Is like I try and put like life goals in for each year, and one of them always has to be some kind of like next level adventure of some form. That I think if I just keeps up the momentum level of doing it, whereas if it's sort of like a few years ago where you did something cool, you're like, maybe this year isn't going to be the one either. Whereas if like every year you have to do something that like is pretty scary and big, it just keeps up that level of doing things. Wasn't ideal because I was meant to be going to the Arctic this year, which got cancelled. And then because I had the 2 weeks off was when I did my ultra marathon, because I had to do something that I hadn't done. And I'd put on 5 kilos to go to the Arctic and hadn't been training to run marathons. So I then ran an ultra marathon in the complete wrong state, which then ended up giving me a leg fracture. But also I thought that was maybe kind of good because I learned a bit more about how my body feels in terms of types of injury and things that I should or shouldn't be running on and stuff. And I was like, well, okay, I want to do even bigger ones like 100 milers and things. And knowing what's going to put me back into hospital or not is probably a good one to know, because I can then go into these things with a bit more awareness. So it's all okay, I think.
Sliding doors moments, one shuts, another one opens.
Yeah, exactly. And also it made me very aware that I really, really want to go to the Arctic. I was like, shit, I was sort of down about it and disappointed perhaps, but like I knew that something would work out, but it was very like an inside feeling like, oh my God, I have to go there at some point.
Good to have that fire lit, because otherwise things can seem kind of like a tick box exercise that, I just need to do this, need to do that. But actually having that taken away from you now and felt that fire burning means that you know this is the right thing for you to do.
Definitely. Yeah. How have you gone around choosing the things that you've done? Like, why did you row the Atlantic or ski across Greenland kind of thing? Was it?
Yeah. So rowing the Atlantic, I didn't really know this thing existed. I had heard a friend of a friend had rowed across the Atlantic a few years before. So I was kind of loosely aware that this was a thing that was possible, that you could row across the Atlantic, but didn't know that there was actually an organization that supported this. And so James sent me that email, followed the links, and half an hour later, I emailed him back saying, yes, we should do this. P.S. Just put a deposit on a boat. So we were then fully committed. It was properly in for a penny, in for a pound. That was that. And we decided together that we were going to do it. We had the boat built. And 18 months later, we reached Antigua after 63 days at sea. So that was fantastic. And then I was very much of the opinion that I wanted to start doing other large and long expeditions. My gateway drug had been cycling. So cycle touring, been Himalayas a couple of times, and then lots of mountaineering and stuff. And I thought, well, doing these long and hard and arduous expeditions was great. You get to remote places that most people don't get to. It's a big challenge. It's the uncertainty whether you're going to succeed, which is quite an exciting aspect of doing a big expedition. And so doing something in the polar regions was just a natural next step. and skiing across Greenland seemed like a good gateway into that. So yeah, teamed up with my friend Murray, and we spent 23 days or just under 24 days skiing across Greenland. And I really thought that I was then going to carry on doing these longer, harder expeditions. And yeah, South Pole and various other things were very much on my mind. But then I started to get distracted by what I would describe as activities that deliver their payload in a single and powerful dose. So whereas a long expedition, it's all drawn out over time, things like speed flying deliver that same payload in a whopping great hit. So I started to do much more of that. And I'm now going back to thinking that maybe taking my time over some long expeditions would be nice again. So Vatnajökull will probably be about 10 days, give or take. And I'm going to use that as a test to see whether or not our bodies can cope in Antarctica. To potentially think about doing a South Pole trip with 3 spinal cord injury patients. And then very keen to do more in the Arctic with mountaineering in particular, especially because of my family backgrounds with mountaineering in the Arctic. I think would be wonderful. So yeah, all that.
So yes, my burning question in response to that is, obviously huge trips are awesome, but how do you make them happen in terms of having a job and like being a person that can pay for these things and stuff? Because they can be expensive or difficult, which I guess cycling is obviously a great one because it's actually pretty cheap. But like in terms of that's like, I guess people's biggest excuse is like, okay, but I don't have the time or money to go and do these things.
But you're right, it's an excuse. My big thing, I have a very young daughter, 3 years old, and I don't want to spend too much time away from her. But the excuse of time and money, yeah, obviously it does take time and it does take money, but not that much time and not that much money. And what would you rather spend your time or your money doing than great things? Either you spend your time doing stuff that you don't like and that give you nothing, or you spend your time doing great things. Either you spend your money buying shit you don't need, or you spend it on great stuff. So I have always had the mentality that if I had spare money, that I would use it on great things and make the time for it. And if you're not doing, you're just making excuses, to be perfectly honest. Employers can be difficult about these things, but they can also be understanding. And no one's going to begrudge you taking 2 weeks away to have a mega adventure. And you can have a mega adventure in just a few days. You can have a totally life-changing adventure in just a few days. And we all have that within us in terms of our ability to manage time away from work, all of us. And you can have an astonishingly tough adventure on almost no money, if that's what you choose. Just don't do things guided. Just go by yourself. Cycling, climbing, mountaineering, hiking, whatever it ends up being. Things like rowing the Atlantic, that's expensive because you've got to buy a boat. But that's pretty rare for a trip to be that expensive if you're doing stuff by yourself. But just stop making excuses. What would you rather do with your life than use your time and your money to fill your life with amazing experiences?
That was an epic answer. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Glad I asked that. Thank you so much for being such a huge inspiration. That's just crazy what you've been doing with your life.
Thanks for having me, Sam. It's always good to talk to you.
You too. Wow, what a legend Niall is. If you recognized any slight moments of a man crush going on from my side for Niall during the episode, well, your senses were correct because I am a total fangirl. He just has such a positive outlook on everything. I found the conversation just such a brilliant outlook on the importance of appreciating life and enjoying whatever we have with full force. I always love talking with Niall, and you can find his appearances on the podcast before in previous years on the show if you search for Niall. His expedition across Iceland is going to plan, and he will be raising money for the Millimeters to Mountains Foundation that help people who suffer accidents get back into adventure and experiencing the amazing world that the rest of us take for granted. Niall will be filming the adventure across Iceland with his 2 friends for a series that is going to be broadcast widely. And if you run some form of company that likes sponsoring really cool things, then it's a really good opportunity to get some exposure for you and support an amazing cause. And then if you've suffered an accident yourself and you're interested to find out more about the Millimeters to Mountains Foundation and the potential events and expeditions that you might be able to get involved with, do visit the charity's website at Millimeters to Mountains. So, if you enjoyed the episode, please share it with anyone that you think might appreciate a little more inspiration in their life, and don't forget to give us a good rating so that way my girlfriend won't leave me for a podcaster with better ratings than me. I'd like to keep this one. Finally, enjoy the rest of your week. Remember, If you want to enjoy your life, that does start with enjoying today. So be kind to yourself, and whilst you're at it, be kind to someone else. Thanks for listening.